Welcome to the Adoption and Foster Care Journey, a podcast to encourage, educate, and equip you to care for children and youth through adoption, foster, and kinship care. Hosted by an adoptive mom with over 22 years of kinship and adoptive parenting experience. She's on this journey with you. Please welcome Sandra Flach.
All right, I am going to read from James chapter 1, verses 2 through 5. Dear brothers and sisters, whenever trouble comes your way, let it be an opportunity for joy. For when your faith is tested, your endurance has a chance to grow. So let it grow, for when your endurance is fully developed, you will be strong in character and ready for anything. If you need wisdom, if you want to know what God wants you to do, ask him, and he will gladly tell you. He will not resent your asking. Well, again, that was James 1, verses 2 through 5. I am your host, Sandra Flach. Welcome to this episode of the Adoption and Foster Care Journey podcast, where we are focusing on fetal alcohol spectrum disorders this month, as it is FASD Awareness Month. And while we don't solely focus on FASD, it is a topic that regularly comes up here because I'm an adopted mom and of 5, and 3 of my kiddos are diagnosed. 2 of my kiddos are diagnosed with FAS. Others, it's suspected. And I find that most parents and even professionals don't really realize how frequent and how common FASD actually is. It is the leading cause of learning and developmental disabilities worldwide. And about 1 in 20 school-age children in the United States have been prenatally exposed. That makes FASD more prevalent than even autism, which affects 1 in 36. And so many kids in adoptive and foster and even kinship situations have been prenatally exposed. Sometimes parents know that there maybe was drug use, but often alcohol is not known. I always say if there's been drug use, you know that most likely there's been alcohol use as well. And alcohol does more significant damage, longer lasting harm. And also the symptoms of FASD, very similar to the symptoms of trauma, which all of our kids have experienced if they've come in through a foster or adoptive placement. So we talk about it on the show because you need to know about it, and you may very well be living with it and didn't know, and you need to be better equipped. So in honor of FASD Awareness Month, we're going to be talking all throughout this month with people who are very well connected in the community, parents, professionals, and even individuals with FASD. So today we have an amazing mom guest with us. So I can't wait for you to get to meet her. But before we do that, I want to remind you about resources that we offer, especially if you are raising kiddos with an FASD. We have a support group. We have lots of training and one-on-one parent coaching. So check out this information about our support group, and I'll catch you on the other side.
Sandra Flach, host of the Adoption and Foster Care Journey podcast, and FASD educator Debbie Raymond, invite you to join Hope for the FASD Journey, a virtual support community for parents and caregivers raising individuals with fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, diagnosed or not. This faith-based support community meets online 3 times each month, features special VIP guests, and a private Facebook group for members only, which includes Soul Care Saturday video devotionals led by Sandra and Deb. Both Sandra and Deb are adoptive moms raising kids with FASD and facilitators of the Facets neurobehavioral model. For details and to register, visit justicefororphansny.org/hope-community. That's justicefororphansny.org/hope-community.
So like I mentioned, I am a mom of 2 diagnosed with fetal alcohol syndrome. They are presently 18 and 21 years old. And I spent a long time trying to figure out, is this trauma? Is this that FAS thing that I don't really know a whole lot about? Did all the connected parenting things, learn to disarm fear and build trust and connection and do all of those things, which we have to do. Those are vitally important and necessary, and they work. And I'm 100% advocate for understanding the impacts of trauma, being trauma informed, the connected parenting things, all of that. And I still use all of those approaches and methods, and they do still work. But if there's been prenatal exposure also, it's kind of like next level hard. So we need some more tools to be able to really navigate that and support our kids. So that's what I like to offer. So in addition to, of course, the support group that you just heard about, and parent coaching that I offer, I do offer online and in-person workshops. And I speak and I travel and I train. But coming up online this month, I have one more of the intro to FASD workshops that I do. It's free online. The next one is Thursday, September 26th at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. And it's great for parents and caregivers or anybody working with our kids. If you suspect that your kiddo has an FASD or that they do, maybe their Sunday school teacher or their grandparent or their adult sibling or anybody working with your kiddo, or even you yourself need just a little bit more understanding about FASD, tune in for this workshop because it's very helpful. And I teach that brain-based parenting approach using the neurobehavioral model, the facets model. So you'll find that very helpful. If you want to take a deep dive, I am offering my next deep dive starting at the beginning of October. This is a deep dive into FASD. I do use the facets neurobehavioral model for this. It is 6 3-hour sessions. So it's 18 hours worth of content. The first session begins on Wednesday, October 2nd at noon Eastern. So it goes 12 to 3 every Wednesday, starting October 6th starting October 2nd and goes through November 6th. And we do offer certificates of completion for all of the workshops. So if you need that for your continuing education training, for your foster parenting license or whatever, you can have that. So to register for the workshops, for the support group, for the parent coaching, any of those things, you can find out more information and get connected at our website, justicefororphansny.org. Click the training tab at the top of the homepage, and you'll see it'll say FASD. You can go there, and then you'll be able to explore our website and learn all about what we're offering there. Also, I have a blog, my personal website, sandraflach.com, and I have blogged about all of the primary symptoms of FASD. So you can check that out as well. Links to everything, of course, in the show notes. So you can easily find them. And as always, as every podcaster says, please subscribe, follow the show, leave a review at Justice for Orphans. We are also, this is the video version of this podcast is out there on YouTube. So you can check that out there on the Justice for Orphans YouTube channel. So I hope you do all of those things. Now to the really important and fun and exciting stuff. Our guest today, we have with us Barrett Brackett. Barrett is an adoptive mom of 3 brilliant kiddos with neurobehavioral conditions, including FASD. She lives out her passion and calling, forged by experience, by offering care to those who have experienced trauma in a variety of contexts. She holds a competence and character growth model certificate from the Townsend Institute at Concordia University, a formation certificate from the CCEF School of Biblical Counseling, and a narrative-focused trauma care certificate from the Allender Center at the Seattle School of Theology and Psychology. When she's not devouring a book or geeking out on neuroscience, Barrett enjoys leading worship with her husband and welcoming their community into their home for great food and conversation. I'll be over for the great food. And right now we're going to have some great conversation. So please welcome Barrett Brackett. Hey, Barrett.
Hello.
I am so excited to have you on the show. So thank you for agreeing to be on.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, we know each other because you've taken some of the training, you were in the support group. But I'm so excited that our listeners are going to get to know you, because I know you just are going to bring so much wealth of information and encouragement to our conversation today. So we'll get to it. You and your husband have 3 kiddos, right? 3.
That's right.
And they're all adopted. So let's just start off with your adoption story. What led you to adopt?
Sure. Well, I had a heart to adopt a sibling set from foster care since I was a little girl. But it wasn't till I was in my 30s that I realized how unusual that was. That it was very God-given. I just kind of thought, well, doesn't everybody watch, when they watch, Little Orphan Annie or read Anne of Green Gables, don't they also want to adopt, with all the orphan stories we have? And, one of my favorite shows at Christmas time was watching the Dave Thomas Foundation Home for the Holidays. And I would just sit there weeping for these children. And God just put that on my heart as a young girl. Just this desire to keep siblings together in a home. And so I just grew up with that in my heart. And it wasn't until later that I realized that it was just actually the Lord planting that dream in there. And so it was realized decades later.
Yeah.
So a long time ago.
Tell us about bringing your kids home. So they are a sibling set then. So tell us about that part of the story.
Yeah, so I went from being in the corporate world to a stay-at-home mom of 3 overnight.
Wow.
So it was a huge, huge shift for me. And we brought home our kiddos. And, my first day being a mom, I was a mom of a 2-year-old, a 6-year-old, and a 7-year-old. And so, it was just... it was quite an adjustment, but it was a dream come true for me. I can remember looking in the rearview mirror of my car and seeing car seats and seeing kids in them. And that to me was just like, it happened. It came true, so it was such joy bringing them home, and such hope, and such just kind of a decades of a dream growing that was planted so long ago. There was a lot of joy. And a lot of chaos.
And a lot of chaos. We can all relate to that too. And and so they came through foster care.
Yeah.
That was how they came in. So kids who come in through foster care, or even if it's international adoption, domestic adoption, however they end up joining our family, they've all experienced some level of trauma, right? And loss. So what was that adjustment like for your family? Were you prepared? Did you experience any of those, big behaviors that can come with trauma? Were you trauma informed? Fill us in there.
Yeah. So I really appreciate our adoption agency. I feel like they really try to inform parents and to train parents. And there were a lot of optional trainings that I attended. And if there was a book mentioned, it was on my reading list and I read it. I'm total overachiever in that. And I love to read. And so I was probably unusually trained and read as far as adoptive parents going into this. But I feel like it's kind of a lot like, say, premarital counseling versus being married. There's some things you just can't train for, and you can't prepare for until you're in that situation. And so for all the training and all the books and all of the imaginations that we have, these scenarios in our head that we've heard of that we could come across, just living the life, is really where so much of that comes to life, and where you realize, oh, that's what they were talking about. And it really takes a lot of time, I think, to connect what you read and hear to what it looks like in the daily life of raising a child. I can remember we were TBRI, fully trained, and that was kind of our lifeline. And I remember I printed out so many of their little short scripts and just tools and tips and techniques, and we had a binder, and we would pull that binder out every night and go, okay, what do we do with this, what do we do with that, and we would just okay, what does Karen Purvis say about this? You know, and because you read these books and you watch her trainings and then you go, oh, okay, wait, this is a real life child in front of me, you know, with these big behaviors. And I think 3 at once was a lot. It was 3 on 2, you know, and so the on-ramp is so steep when you adopt a sibling set. There's just, and being new parents, we didn't have parenting experience. So it was all hypothetical at that point, you know, and so it was a steep learning curve. Yeah, it was abrupt. It was a very jarring transition. But yet, you know, it's exactly what the Lord, I think, had planned for our family, as hard as it was. So
Yeah. And I mean, I can relate to, I mean, we had biological children, and then we brought in a sibling set of 3, who didn't speak English either, because we adopted from Ukraine. So I'd read some books, not enough, I don't think, but I'd read some, but even that went out the window at first, because then they're home, you know, and then there's that blessed chaos and adjustment, just getting to know each other and settling in and all of that. But then over time, you start noticing some things, but I think our biggest challenge actually came when we went back and brought home the 4th sibling, because that was our introduction to fetal alcohol syndrome. So what about you guys? At what point did you suspect FASD? Had you read a book about that prior to them coming, or where did you begin to realize, oh, this is what's going on?
Well, you know, I wish I could say I saw the signs right away. We knew exactly what to do, but our journey was really convoluted and very cloudy, you know, and we had information hidden in paperwork and brief conversations with social workers, and then anecdotal information. But the big picture was not clear to us, and there were no diagnoses. Our kids qualified for no services. They were doing so well, and everything, every behavior, every experience was really looked at under a trauma lens, because the background that they had just come out of was very directly related to what we were seeing in our home in so many ways. And so, especially being TBRI trained, you're really looking at things like, okay, well, they've experienced this, to our knowledge. You know, we obviously don't know everything, but from what we know, they could be acting this way because of something that happened in their past, you know, a past traumatic experience. And so you look at everything through a trauma lens, and with the hope of, with stability and love and consistency, that these are things that will heal, not knowing at the time that there's actually organic things going on in the brain that are at play here. And so it was not until I attended, so it's a funny story. It's a total God story, but we experienced a traumatic event as a family. A couple of years ago, we lost our home in a house fire. And
I did not know that.
Oh, you didn't? Yeah, it was an extremely difficult event to experience with 3 kids from difficult backgrounds, very familiar with trauma, and yet to have this trauma that we experienced as a family. And the Lord has really just written our story amazingly. And one of the pieces of this story is that we lost almost all of our possessions. But we had a safe with our adoption paperwork in it, and that was not burned, but it was sealed shut with the heat, and we couldn't open it. But someone was able to find that, broke into our safe, thinking there were more exciting things in it than adoption paperwork, and stole it. And so we'd lost all of our paperwork, and so we had to reach out to our adoption agency, and it had been a couple of years at that point. And so that triggered us getting back on their post-adoptive services list, where they were sending emails for random Zoom trainings, you know. And so because we had somehow fallen off of that support list, I don't know. And so I kept getting these emails of, okay, this training coming up. And I was as I'm trying to deal with the aftermath of the fire, I'm trying to attend some of these online trainings to get the support, like how to deal with like best support my kids. And one of them came up, oh, this is on FASD. And I was like, well, okay, I don't need to go to this one because our kids don't have that diagnosis. But you know what? Why not? It was literally like in the midst of having like no time, the Lord's like, yeah, how about that one? And we're like, maybe, this, maybe one of our kiddos, I don't know. So I sit there and I watch this training and my jaw drops when they talk about all the primary symptoms. And I cannot tell you the level of clarity. Like if someone had just said, like, let me describe your home. Let me describe each of your children. And so that, so I watched it and I had one kiddo in mind that I thought like, oh, this kind of sounds like, and as I watched it further and further into the training, I was like, oh no, that sounds like that one. Oh, and that really describes that one. And so it was this, and then I got the recording. I begged for the recording of this so I could show my husband and say, you got to watch this training. Like, listen to these primary symptoms of FASD and tell me these are not our children. And so he did. And he's like, what is that? Like, what did we stumble upon? And so then that began a deep dive into FASD. And we didn't know it at the time, but we live very close to one of the founding FASD diagnostic clinics in the country, or in the world, actually. And we were able to get in and get our children seen by them. And it took months and months. They do have a long waiting list too. But in that meantime of waiting for the appointments, we did a deep dive. And even, a couple weeks in, just a few of the basic interventions and accommodations, just seeing those actually help our kids settle immediately.
Wow.
It was life-changing for us. And then when we finally got the diagnosis months later, it was heartbreaking and super empowering because we finally knew what we were dealing with, and we were able to put the right lens on our children. A brain lens versus like a moral lens or a parenting lens. Like I'm a failure as a parent because none of the parenting books apply to my children or to me, you know? And so it really gave us the right lens to view our kids and to see accommodations as a mercy and not as a crutch,
Yeah.
So
I love that. I love how you phrase that. And so what were just kind of, can you list off some of those primary symptoms that you were seeing? Because so often, if you're not familiar with it, you're thinking these are behaviors that I'm dealing with that need to be disciplined or, consequenced or corrected. So what were some of those? Can you give us kind of just a list?
Sure. Well, you're thinking about kiddos developmentally, even the social workers, when you're in the foster care system, they're asking you, are they hitting these developmental milestones? And so you're cross-referencing, like, what should this 7, 8, 9-year-old, 3, 4, 5-year-old be doing, thinking? And if they're not hitting these milestones, you're going, well, is it because of past trauma? Or, well, actually they hit this, they're able to do this today, but they couldn't yesterday, and they can't. And, and so that developmental level of functioning, that dismaturity that is so varied, so variable, and so unpredictable, that one day they're hitting a milestone and then the next day they're literally not. And that lens of, even as a parent, you want to hold them accountable for what they can do. And without a lens of saying, like, actually their brain is off today.
Yeah.
Without that lens, then it's a losing battle because you're asking them to do something that they can't do. And so we really noticed the dismaturity, and just especially as they got older. So there's more variance when you're younger. Kids develop at different rates, but as they get older, we saw more and more things, and compared to their peers, and just I would say just the unpredictability of when, like, what age are they today at this thing?
Yeah.
That was a big thing that made so much sense when we realized that that's actually a primary symptom of the brain functioning in different ways from moment to moment,
Yeah.
And sensory things, sensory issues are not just related to FASD, but looking back, we had one kiddo that's very sensitive to touch, and one that is very undersensitive, like does not feel things. And you put those two together, the interference of two kiddos like that, it makes for some interesting sibling dynamics, you know. But and even just sensitivity to like what kind of sleeping environment do they need. Sleep is really tough. And sound machines and blackout curtains and zero distractions, things like that. Those were things that our kids were really highly sensitive to. And just the stimulation, like getting overstimulated, and really having a low tolerance for stimulation. And just like we would call it about, oh, we're expiring. We would to kind of joke about, oh, our kids are expiring, time to go. But before an FASD lens, you let them expire and then you leave. But with an FASD lens, you can go, you know what? We don't need to expire. We can leave before, before we're overtired, before we're overstimulated. So that was like really something that we didn't know that was helpful to learn. And just like in the area of nutrition, not being able to sense hunger and fullness, which we really attributed to, background nutrition. Like we really attributed to their past, but it was actually very related to their present and to their bodies, to their brain now, to their central nervous system. And so things that even just sensitivity to sugar, extremely sensitive to sugar. So those are things that made a lot of sense when we figured out that's going on with the brain.
Wow.
Let's see, language, communication. I mean, confabulation was like the best word I ever learned, honestly, to name what we were experiencing, because it's very confusing. It's extremely confusing. And it's especially confusing when you're trying to have any moral lens on your parenting. And, like just basic good parenting is teaching your kids not to lie and knowing that lying is actually a developmental thing. Like kids go through a phase where they're trying out lying. That's developmentally appropriate. But when that just maturity, that development is so scattered and it's obvious they're not like trying to lie. It's like, it's obvious they actually think a different truth is true.
Yeah.
And you can show them a video of their actions. You can show them evidence of, whatever the situation is. And they're blank faced saying, that wasn't me. I don't know what you're talking about. I didn't do that. And you're going, oh my gosh, like, what is the matter? Like, am I crazy? Are they crazy? And it's really scary. But when you learn that, oh, wait, like their brain actually filled in a gap with different information, or, oh, their brain actually, their working memory failed them. They actually don't remember.
They don't remember they did it. Yeah.
So it helps make sense of so many confusing and befuddling behaviors.
Yeah.
And then like processing pace, we really saw, we heard a lot, so many whats and I don't knows. And you're trying to figure out, okay, are they just not comfortable talking to me? How can I elicit this information from this child? How can I make them comfortable so that we can have this back and forth in this dialogue? But they really were buying time. To process what I was saying. And I'm a fast talker. It's a really tricky combination to have a mom like me when I am like rapid fire,
guilty also. I like a lot of words.
Me too. Me too. And that's one of my strengths. And that's okay. But it's not helpful.
Right.
In communication with my children. It's really not. And so so just understanding like that processing time that they needed, and that it's way more than I ever think they need. Like, I think I've given them processing time and I have never given them enough, because for me, like my brain just processes really quickly and language comes very quickly for me. And it just doesn't. for my kiddos. But the language is there, but it's just the retrieval is very different. And so, and one thing that we've experienced with one of our kiddos is that was really eye-opening when we got the diagnosis. They called out how their impulsivity can mask their processing speed. So we have one with with slow processing speed, but extreme impulsivity. And so she would always give you an answer, but it wasn't actually the answer to the question you asked, because she was still processing the question that we asked, or whatever, information we asked for. But her default response was yes, no, sure, I don't know, yeah. And so you thought she got what you were saying and then was going to proceed with that information, whatever it was. But she was still like, okay, what did she say? What was the question? Yeah. But meanwhile, she'd already given me a response. And so so that can look like disobedience, right? Because you acknowledged what I said, you said yes, or you gave me, I don't know, you told me something, but it wasn't that. But once we learned that impulsivity was actually a mask for the slow processing speed, because we were shocked with how slow her processing speed is, because her expressive verbal ability is so great. But the receptive, is a whole nother story. So, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, I could go on, but
yeah, no, I know you're doing great. And I'm just sure that there are listeners who are like, oh, my kid does that, or we have that. And, because a lot of times people don't realize what the primary symptoms of FASD are. And I've interviewed parents before, and really even before I really understood it as well as I do now. And I would like, are you familiar with FASD? And they're like, oh yeah, no, we don't have that, but we have this. And then they would give this long list of things, or even a short list. And all of those things would be symptoms, and be like, I think you need to read this book, Trying Differently Rather Than Harder. And
right.
Yeah.
Well, if you had talked to me just 2 years ago, I would have been that parent.
Yeah.
Because we're relying on what we know at the time. And and when you don't have a diagnosis, or you don't have access to a diagnosis, or you haven't heard what the primary symptoms are, you don't know what you don't know. And there are a lot of other diagnoses that are very overlapping.
Yeah.
And then you have these other things where it's like, but that doesn't line up. Wait, but that too. But and so there's some very specific things about FASD that once you kind of can wrap your mind around what these primary symptoms are, it's so empowering as a parent to realize, okay, this is the game we're playing. I thought we were playing a totally different game.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's new rules here that I need to know about. And I agree, because we were on the trauma track for a long time, getting all of that training. And my boys had diagnoses for fetal alcohol syndrome, but at that time, way back when, it was like, here's your diagnosis, have a nice day. They gave me a pamphlet on ADHD, and I think every kid with an FASD gets that ADHD diagnosis, right? But I didn't, and then the only thing I found online was that dark and hopeless outcomes, because back then that's all that was out there. And now there's a whole lot more hope, and a whole lot more support and resources for families. And but like you said, you don't know what you don't know. But once you begin to learn, it's like you can't not see it now, because it's like your eyes are open to it, and you see how your kid processes information differently, more slowly, and that impulsivity and the dysmaturity, like you said, and all, the language and all of those things, and the confabulation. I like how you said that was your new word. My word was perseveration. Yeah. When I first learned about perseveration, I was like, oh, it has a name. Like I always assumed it had something to do with what was going on. And that's where our kids can get hyper fixated on something, and they can't they can't let it go. And for my boys, it was always like once they would get birthday money and we'd order something from Amazon or wherever. And then it was like every 5 minutes we had to track it. And then like the day that it's supposed to arrive, they would be down at like we live in the country, so we have a long driveway. They'd want to be parked out by the mailbox waiting for the UPS man or the mailman or whoever might be bringing it. And like there was like no homeschooling happening that day. There was nothing else going on because their brain could only think about and focus on that one thing. Right. And then it was like once they got it, 2 days later, they didn't know where that was, but now it's time to move on to something else that they're going to perseverate about. And it's like, oh my goodness, when I learned that there was a name for it, I felt like, okay, all right, there's a name for it. I'm good with that. I can wrap my mind around that it's part of this disability. Yeah. So we learn so much, and it's fascinating.
Yeah. And as a parent, you can name it, just being able to name it and say, oh, they're perseverating. Okay. So that means I'm not going to get XYZ done that I thought I was going to get
Yeah.
done.
Oh yeah.
And instead of saying, why are you asking about this again? Or like, let's write it down, because being asked the same thing over and over and over again, when you can give them a visual tool, that it saves both parties so much frustration. But before, if you have the expectation of you asked, I answered, why are we talking about this again? Like that's a really difficult one to parent from.
Yeah.
So it's super helpful to know what you're working with.
Yeah. And always learning. So I know you and your husband took one of my trainings. I think it was at the 18 hour. Which one did you guys do? Yeah. And how did you find that?
Yeah. We're overachievers, and just like, just we love, geeking out on neuroscience and what we can, learn about our kiddos. And once we realized this, once the world of FASD was opened to us, it was like, how can we wrap our minds around this? I remember we read Nate Sheets' book, like before the diagnosis, so helpful and just so, just really gave us some really practical, tactical things to implement right away. And we saw results like almost immediately. And the results are not just in our kids' behaviors, they're in our own psyche. They're in our own, we're not going crazy anymore because we're going, oh, that's what's happening. I can deal with that. I know what it is. Okay. That's not really an appropriate ask because they can't do that. So I'm going to stop asking them to do it, so helpful. And so we got the diagnosis and then we, I don't even.
So you took the training. I asked you about the 18-hour training.
How we got that. We got connected with that. And that was like, that was just like, give us all the information. We were just so desperate for just understanding and just the practical, what does this look like in our daily life with our kiddos, and it was just really, really helpful. And the diagnostic tools, just being able to be really specific about, because it's tricky to connect a behavior to a symptom to an accommodation.
Yeah.
And so I think one of my biggest takeaways was being able to flesh out, this is what this kiddo struggles with. This is why, and this is how we move forward.
Yeah.
And that's really what we needed to be able to help them thrive and help them settle and continue to help ourselves thrive as parents and help ourselves settle as parents, because it is such a difficult parenting journey. And even more so without that training. So,
yeah. Well, I'm glad you guys got something out of that. I just want to revisit diagnosis again, because I know so many families struggle with that, because unless they're, most practitioners, unless there's maternal admission of alcohol consumption, unless there's the facial features, you're not going to get a diagnosis. And then it varies by state, and a lot of states are just not up to par with understanding this, that it's not there. But you said you live right close to a world-renowned diagnostic clinic. Tell us a little bit about that. Where do you live?
Well, we're on the West Coast. We're in Washington. And so we have the University of Washington has a diagnostic clinic there that is leading, leading the way really in the research that they're doing and what they're learning and offering to families. And who knew? Who knew it was there, and who
Yeah.
knew we needed it? God knew.
Yeah.
And it's just been, such a gift. And I mean, I talk with families, with parents, and I say, what I love about the facets training is it's just for neurobehavioral conditions.
All of them.
So
Yeah.
all of them. And so it doesn't take a diagnosis to try tools.
Yeah.
And to see how they help, see how they work, because it really addresses any neurodivergence, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it gives you the lens of, we're no longer trying to make an individual like the norm. We are finally accommodating the individual. So whatever that diagnosis is, or whatever the suspicion is, it's such a helpful tool to really parent the child rather than parent a child, just to be so specific about your kiddos. So
I love that. I love that. So now, did you guys have in their records, was there maternal admission? Was there facial features? Like how did your kids qualify for a diagnosis?
Yeah, we had the information that we needed to get the diagnosis.
Good. It's so hard for the families that don't have that, and I think most don't have that. That's the holdup. But whether you have the diagnosis or not, knowing how to parent, focusing on that brain difference, regardless of which what neurobehavioral condition may be going on, and even if parents just highly suspect the FASD, but they don't get the diagnosis, the approach, the tools can still work straight across the board. Because even for those of us who get the diagnosis, there doesn't always open doors to more services and supports,
Right.
So we have to be able to use those tools and to understand that. So a diagnosis is wonderful if you can get it. But if you can't get it, it doesn't necessarily mean you're at a loss, because you can still move forward with the right tools. So thank you for sharing that. So I know previously you homeschooled. So tell us as we're all embarking on a new school year, as we record this, what does school look like for your family right now?
Yeah, school is an ever evolving organism.
Yes.
We have had many iterations of school, and as our kiddos learn and grow and mature, and as we as parents learn and grow and mature in our understanding of them and of their needs, there's a lot of reevaluation. There's a lot of pivoting. When we, taking in 3 kiddos at once, and it takes time to get to know someone. Even if you birth a child, it takes time to get to know that child and their needs, wants, preferences, personality. It's the same thing with anyone you meet. And so when it took us time to figure out what do these kids, what are their strengths, what are their challenges, and there weren't a lot of options for us adopting from foster care at the beginning. It was kind of like, you go to the local public school, and that's your, that's the expectation. And so homeschooling wasn't an option at the beginning, and we had significant challenges in the public school system there. And so much of it was around, you're sending a child out of your care for hours a day, having no idea what's going on in the classroom, and then having to decipher the outcomes. Whatever the teacher said happened, you weren't there, and your child can't tell you what happened because of their slow processing, their language difficulties, their confabulation. So all these things, it's very difficult to get a true sense of what is happening when they're outside your care. And then also when you're stepping into, an adoptive placement, it's a whole new world, and they kind of have one foot in school, one foot in this new home, another foot in their past home, and so it's very difficult for a child to be context switching all the time. And so we found that it was a very difficult 1.5 years while they were still in public school. And so the day that we went to court and they became, Brackets, we dropped off the withdrawal paperwork at the school and we started homeschooling that day.
Wow.
Because we really found, so one of the benefits of homeschooling is that you are with your child and you get to know them and see them, and you're not guessing the context of things and what actually happened, because they're actually with you. And it accelerates that getting to know and the bonding and things like that. And it's also a really big ask on parents. Homeschooling is not easy. It's great for kiddos. It can be great for kiddos, and it can be really hard on parents. And so we homeschooled for a few years. They made tremendous progress at great cost. It was very costly for me as a mom to homeschool 3 kiddos with FASD.
Yes.
It was very tricky. When I didn't know they had FASD yet. I'll put that in there. So yeah. But the Lord has just guided our journey step by step. And when we experienced the house fire, we lost all our homeschooling supplies. We had no home to homeschool in and no supplies. And so that we chose to put them into a private school at that time, because there was so much to deal with in the aftermath of the fire, and just replacing things, building our life again, and dealing with insurance, and so they were placed into private school, which was such a gift because we could see them against their peers. So homeschooling provides a shelter where you don't get that like multiple sets of eyes, multiple teachers, multiple adults interacting with your kids as much, and also the peer comparison. And so putting them in a classroom of this, peers their same age, really helped to highlight where they were struggling, and the differences that can really be hidden in homeschooling. So homeschooling has these beautiful gifts, but it also has these areas that you don't get everything in homeschooling. You don't get everything in a classroom.
Right.
So we got to get the benefits of homeschooling, and then we got some benefits of being in a classroom, and that really helped us to identify some of these primary characteristics of FASD and how they played out in the classroom. Because at home, you kind of naturally accommodate, you don't ask that of them because they can't do that. But in the classroom, the teacher says, no, this is what we're doing.
Right.
And when they can't do those things, but everybody else can, you're like, oh, okay. Is that just because we haven't done that before in our homeschool, or they're not, is that beyond their capacity, So it really provided an environment where we could just get some more information, I think. And it was a dumpster fire at the same time. So
that's honest.
We had for a couple of them. So, but it's like, it was such helpful information, even though it was really hard. It was helpful information. And so then, we had them in for a year, and we were able to bring them back home to homeschool after that. And we've identified recently some significant learning disabilities on top of their FASD. So with that knowledge, we are actually trying an online special needs school this year, so that we can kind of have the both, get some expertise and some other outside accountability, but also keep the structure, keep the I know what's going on piece, not guessing what's happening in classroom, like they're going to be here in our home doing this.
Right.
And also give them some safe ways to connect socially, because social struggles are really difficult. And so give them an online classroom where they're with some peers, but the way you negotiate online is different than the way that you negotiate on the playground. And that can be really tricky. So we've had a lot of experience with a lot of different things.
Yeah. And I find that that's common. And I don't think that's a bad thing, because we've done the same thing. We homeschooled forever because that's just what we did with all of our older biological kids. And then we homeschooled our adopted kids. And then we reached a point to where our younger 2 boys, we felt like they need some of these services and supports that the school can give. And maybe you experienced this, because when the two boys were home and they both needed one-on-one support, they were much younger, but they both needed one-on-one support. So here we are at the table, and if one kid breathed, the other one couldn't handle it. Like, it was like,
Oh, yeah.
so we couldn't get anything done. So they ended up, we put them, we prayerfully felt led to put them in our public schools special education program. And I've said this on the show before, which worked great until it didn't. And for one, it was COVID, just he spiraled and felt, he was back in fight, flight, and freeze mode and wasn't learning anything. He was just in that survival mode. And then the other one navigated that fairly well. And he was older and he was entering his senior year, and socially that's where that fell apart, because with that dismaturity piece and then him trying so hard to fit in and wanting to fit in, being very impressionable, very susceptible to, peer pressure and things like that, we ended up pulling him out of that program that he was in, and had him finish. He still graduated from school, but we pulled him right out of a vocational program that the school was providing, and sent him to work with his dad during those same hours, and basically told the school, this is how he'll graduate, or we'll just pull him out and full on homeschool him and graduate him. That we know how to do that. And they were like, oh, okay, we'll work with you on this, because they didn't want to lose him, halfway through the senior year. But it's, we have to, we need to tailor the education to the child, not the child to this system of education. What works best, and even now, I shared with you earlier, and our regular listeners are probably, maybe tired of hearing me say it, but right now we're doing, this hybrid model of schooling where our son is going in for just a couple of hours, 3 days a week to the high school for certain things. He's got, I'm doing a little bit of homeschooling with him at home. And then he's got a part-time job that he's got over the summer that he's being really successful in. So we're kind of putting all those things together and calling this his senior year of high school, to get through the year that way. So every year has kind of looked different for him for the past several years, but really the goal is to accommodate, what does he need to be successful? Where is the strengths? What are the challenges? What are just not reasonable expectations for this kid? Because if we want him to learn, we have to have him in an environment where he can learn. And he was not learning. He made it through 2 weeks of full-time public school last April. And it just was not a good fit, and he wasn't learning anything, and it was terrible. And he didn't even want to go back to school this year. So this new plan seems to be working. We're 1 day in as of this recording, so stay tuned.
Yeah.
But I love how you put the kids first, and you understand how their brain works and what accommodations they need and what they're going to need, and you apply that. And that's what our kids need, because it's not one size fits all with education or anything, really, right?
Absolutely. I mean, the creativity required for this journey is insane. And the ability to pivot and trial and error. I mean, how many things have we tried that just don't work? But it's okay. We try the next thing, and you tailor it, like you said, and you just, I had to really let go. I had this dream of what I think would be good for myself as a child, or because I moved a lot as a child, I thought, wouldn't it be wonderful if our kids never had to move and never had to switch schools? So letting go of that dream that actually had nothing to do with my children and everything to do just with me. And just really be able to say, okay, what is the best thing for them today? Yeah. And getting the courage to try something new, and giving yourself the grace for the things that don't work. Yeah. And you just, it's so unpredictable. You don't know what will work, and we were just talking about something that will surprise us. The things that do work, you get caught off guard, like, oh my goodness, this is working. Let's go with it. Yeah. So it's just such a journey of pivoting constantly.
Yeah, totally. And like with my son, one of the parent-teacher conferences last year, the teacher told me that he was the best dishwasher in the class. And I was like, wait a minute, what? He washes dishes? Like, I can't, if I ask him to empty the dishwasher at home, he informs me that if he has to do that, he will run away. It's like, just empty the dishwasher. It's so much easier than running away. But yet he was the star dishwasher in the classroom at school. And then lo and behold, he gets himself this job washing dishes at this little restaurant. And, just months earlier, I didn't even know he knew how to wash a dish. Not that I didn't ask him to or try to teach him that at home, but when mom is trying to teach you that, yeah, you don't want to, that's just mom being mean. But he did learn that skill more at school than he did at home. And then now he's got a job doing it, which I couldn't even imagine. And he's got support and some accommodations in order to be successful in that environment, but he is doing it and he is learning. And yeah, we have to pivot all the time and our kids will surprise us. And it is a crazy journey because things are changing all the time and we do have to be curious and creative and we have to persevere. So you were also part of our Hope for the FASD Journey support group. Would you share a little bit for our listeners who may not be familiar with the group? What was that experience like? What did you find there in that group?
Yeah, it was such a sweet experience because it's just a place where you don't have to explain much. You can share a prayer request or something going on or mention something and you just get smiles and nods. Whereas in our worlds, we often, because FASD is such a hidden disability, people are often shocked at behaviors that happen in the home because they often don't happen the same way in public. And they also, our kids appear just totally typical, and so it's like everyone in the Zoom room sees the same invisible things,
Yeah.
So it's just, it feels really supportive in that way. It's been such like a treasure to have those guest speakers and have such access to them and such, because I listen to a lot of podcasts, but it's different than being able to actually speak with the author or speak with the guest live and ask them questions and ask them personal questions about your situation and your family and stuff. That feels like a real big gift and just to pray out loud with others and to carry their families in your heart and know when you're having a really rough day, like there are a lot of families out there having really rough days. And just to kind of know, like, it's not just us. This is actually just really hard. It's just really hard.
It is hard, but to have that lifeline in a way, one of our moms in the group just this morning posted because we have a private Facebook group that's associated with the support group. And, her son was having a hard time just getting to school this morning and she's dreading the school year, a little bit, but he wants to try it in high school. And she just it was like this SOS prayer. Please pray for us. We're trying to do the school thing today. And it might not be going well. So, we were all able to send, post some words of encouragement, but even more importantly, pray for her and her son. And that's, that's an important part of the group because other parents, if you're parenting a neurotypical kid, you have no idea what kind of journey this is. And we need to hear from and have the support from others who are on the journey and understand the crazy because it can be so crazy that most people, unless you're living it, wouldn't understand. So thank you so much for that. I could chat with you forever. I probably say that to every guest, but it's really true because I love to chat, first of all, as you can tell. But I love to talk with you, Barrett, because you're such a wealth of information as well with lots of experience. But as we do wrap up, though, our listeners are primarily adoptive and foster parents. They're like us. Many of them probably parenting kids with FASD. They might not all know it, but they are. But let's wrap up with some words of encouragement. Would you share with us what anything that's on your heart to offer some encouragement to the parents listening?
I think I would just want to encourage you today that you are the chosen parent for your child. And even if your adoption journey, our adoption journeys are marked by a lot of decisions that we have to make, but in the big picture, they're actually decisions made by a sovereign God who his sovereignty is married with his love and with his goodness. And so he chose you to parent this child that you're parenting today. and he only had humans to choose from. So every parent is a human and has made mistakes and has had good days and bad days of parenting. But he chose you with your background, with your mistakes, with your failures, with your challenges, with your beautiful strengths and glories. He chose you. And so there's no one that would be a better fit for your child. And so just to walk in that confidence that you are held and loved by a sovereign, loving, good God. And so is your child.
I love that. Love that. I did want to ask you to share a little bit about the verse that you picked out, James 1:2-5. I can read it again, unless you have it there handy. I was just going to look it up again because I closed my Bible. Because I wanted to share with you that when we traveled to Ukraine to adopt our kids, I bought this big journal to bring with me to record every day. And in the front of the journal, I literally wrote out Ephesians 1:2-5. So when you picked that verse, I'm like, oh, that's such a good one. So important to me.
Or James?
Oh, I'm sorry. James. I'm sorry. I was saying, if I opened to Ephesians thinking I was in the right spot, but I hadn't turned enough pages. James, sorry, 1 verses, it was 2-5, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Thank you for the correction there.
Yeah. I just want to make sure I had it.
Yeah, no, you did it. You did it right. You did it right. And I read the correct verse at the beginning of the show. I just misspoke now, but it's, dear brothers and sisters, whenever trouble comes your way, let it be an opportunity for joy. For when your faith is tested, your endurance has a chance to grow. So let it grow. For when your endurance is fully developed, you'll be strong in character and ready for anything. If you need wisdom, if you want to know what God wants you to do, ask him, and he will gladly tell you. He will not resent you for asking. So just share a little bit about why you picked that verse.
So I just think I just find myself so desperate for Jesus in this journey, and so desperate for wisdom, and just knowing that the answer to our prayer for wisdom is always yes. He always says, yes, my child, here's my wisdom for you. And sometimes that comes through a facets training. Sometimes that comes through a support group. Sometimes that comes through just a friend, like giving you a hug. You know, his wisdom comes to us. He always answers that prayer. And it's, you know, in the context of testing and trials and the endurance needed. And so what more than just parenting, any parenting, you know, does that describe, you know? And yeah, so I think just that pairing of what we go through as parents paired with the wisdom that he just abundantly will pour into us, that really creates really healthy parents, like complete, fully developed parents that's going through really hard things with a really good God. So.
Love it. Love it. Thank you so much. Thank you for sharing your story and your wisdom with us, and your encouragement. And just thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you so much, Sandra. I really appreciate all that you've done. You've done a lot for our family, and I really thank you for it.
Well, thank you. I'm grateful to be on this journey with you. Wasn't that a great conversation? Barrett is just precious. I hope that you were inspired by everything that she was sharing. And I'm so grateful that you listened and you took the time, because she's such a great guest. And we want to encourage you. We want to equip you for this journey. And I know that you probably learned a lot from our conversation today. You know, myself as a mom of 2 young adults with FASD, I am passionate about providing those resources for you that I wish I had, that I didn't even know I needed way back in those early days. But I couldn't live without them today. So we want to provide those for you. We've got the coaching, the training, the online and in-person training, and the support group, and of course, this podcast that I hope you enjoyed. So to learn more about all of the other things, all the other FASD resources, you would go to our website, justicefororphansny.org. You can find that all there. There is a link in the show notes to all of the above things that were referenced, especially on the top of the show. Be sure to find and follow us on social media. Justice for Orphans has both a Facebook and Instagram page, and you can find me, Sandra Flach, on both platforms as well. Would love to connect with you. And again, I'm grateful to have you along for the journey. And I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Adoption and Foster Care Journey podcast, brought to you by Justice for Orphans. We hope you were encouraged today. Please be sure to subscribe to this podcast and leave a review, and share it with your fellow foster and adoptive parent friends so they can be encouraged too. Be sure to find and follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Justice for Orphans, and check out our website for vital resources at justicefororphansny.org.